our webinar. I am not David, as you will probably see, and I'm joined also by not David. Diana is joining me. Unfortunately, David has come down sick this week, and so you get Diana and myself. It's not the webinar that we had originally been advertising. It's slightly different. We're still talking about the operational aspects of security, but you are in luck. It means that we get to have a couple of different webinars. You'll get to see David's down the track. As I just said, cybersecurity isn't just the technical controls. It isn't which vendor we're going to choose, and it isn't who we're picking our stack. It is it's how we operationalize the controls within our business. So are we doing all the right things outside of the products we pick? I'm Maria Armstrong. I'm one of the executive coaches in the Academy team, and I'm joined by Diana Drury, who's one of our solutions engineers. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to launch a poll. I want you guys to have a think about what your sorry, I'm just putting my polls. I want you to have a think about how well you think your current operational aspects are from today. So I assume you're here for a reason. Oops, wrong one. I assume you're here for a reason to join us on our webinar. Tell us how you think you're doing. We're going to talk about the polls later in the thing. Diana, can you just confirm a poll popped up for you?
Yes, it did.
Jolly good, because it popped up for me, but it's not certain. There we go. Okay. We're going to discuss some frameworks quickly. Sorry, I've just gone into shadow. I look like a cybersecurity criminal at this point in the shadows. Frameworks are really key. There are some great frameworks out there. You will hear about frameworks on a regular basis. There seems to be some overlap with them, and there is. You need to pick a framework. It's really important. It will make a big difference to your business. We hear about the Essential 8, and I really like the Essential 8. It's fantastic, but it tends to be just big buckets of where you put your content. It's great from a sales and marketing discussion with clients because you can explain exactly from a non-technical perspective how you're going to be protecting the clients. From how you apply the operations of security, it's a lot looser to do within your business. NIST is a very high level framework, and probably not appropriate within the small to medium business space. There is some great graphics and information about how to use it for assessing where you are on a security response cycle, which we will share with you after this webinar. But from the actual framework, probably not something we're going to use in our market. SIS controls is something that we find isn't spoken about very often here in the Asia Pacific region, but absolutely brilliant. It breaks it down. It tells you exactly how you do the different steps you do when you do them. It gives you actual dot point facts on what you need to roll out within your business. So I highly recommend SIS controls. It's it's a brilliant framework to use. ISO 27001, again, a lot of detail. It's very big on the, it's very administration heavy. You do need to be audited if you're running with ISO 27001. What we're finding in the Australia and New Zealand, ANZ, is that ISO 27001 is becoming a requirement or a preference for MSPs who are working in the government space. So it's something to be aware of, but the cost to implement ISO 27001 and to continually maintain the auditing is very substantial. So that's my thoughts on ISO. I'm going to hand over to Diana, who's going to talk about productizing your offering.
Thanks for that, Maria. I think what we'll be talking about, particularly on this slide and through the rest of what I'm going to cover today, is how you take those frameworks, and there's going to be different ways that you approach that, how you take that framework, how you take the products, and as Maria said, we're not specifically going to talk about any singular product today, how you start to figure out which ones to use, both frameworks and products, how you start to bring them together, and how you start to make that part of your business, not just internally in terms of your operations, but how you productize that and how you operationalize it within your partners and your customers. So the first step, decide on a market fit. Start to look at what your market and what your customers look like, and start to have a look at what they might need based on their industries. So if you've got a lot of healthcare partners, accountancies, lawyers, you're probably going to have a much higher compliance and security need than you would potentially looking at a lot of retail. I'm not necessarily going to dig into each of those, but from that, figure out what's going to fit best. If you don't need absolute top-end security and it's not going to be something that's going to fit your customer base, maybe you don't need to look that high. So start to see what framework you're using with and what products is going to fit into that, and how then your customers fit into that. Once you've figured out what you'd like to use, you can start to look at creating a scope, what you are going to do, and also very specifically what you're not going to do in that offering. If there is something that a customer needs and you've only got one or two that need it, it's not going to be part of your standard cybersecurity scope. Create a different scope for that, because that is a specific need. Really make sure that you're encompassing what is, and very specifically, again, what isn't going to be there. From there, you'll create that as a package, and that's version 1. As I said, you can start to add more advanced offerings from there, but create your core. From there, you're going to make sure that you include different service descriptions in that scope. And I want to get real specific here when we talk about service descriptions. We're not saying X product, X email backup, X cybersecurity product. What we're saying is we're going to offer this service. And to our customers, we're going to describe it as the things that live in that service. That allows you to have different versions of that for different partners. And again, scope out what isn't included in those versions. When we say that about a service description, you don't want to tell your customers necessarily what product you're using unless there is a specific need, because you're just telling them what services you offer. You are talking to them about services rather than products. From there as well, you want to start talking about your labor. So yes, how much, the next section we're going to talk about is like pricing subscription. How much is the product that you finally decided on going to cost? But also, how much effort is it going to take to deploy that product, to maintain that product, and also to get your customers from where they are to where they need to be around that, and start looking at that labor effort and price that up. When you're thinking about labor, a general rule of thumb is you want about 70% gross margin on there, just so you have a really nice buffer in case there is extra effort taken. And then just following on from that, we want to talk about the subscription licensing, because you've got your labor effort, but there is a cost to each software or each particular solution that you might be wanting to include. So just again, to sum up this slide, how are you going to sell cybersecurity as a product? We're not necessarily talking about what sales points you need to hit onto your customers. It's how do you turn that into a product? If we want to move to the next slide, we'll talk a little bit about the contracts. Now we've figured out what our offering is, we need to create the contracts. It's on the slide here, you need contracts. Contracts are kind of non-negotiable these days. The risks have just gotten too high in terms of the liabilities. If you start doing something and kind of go halfway there, if you don't go there or don't fully cover it, you're going to have some issues around what's not working for you there. And also, maybe you've done something, you didn't contract that you were doing it, you're still liable for it. So again, we've talked about the scopes. Those scopes really need to match up with the contracts. Please don't copy random contracts from the web. Make sure you are getting legal help that's going to cover your specific environment, your region. There are different requirements for these sorts of contracts, even between states in Victoria, and also then again with the verticals that you're potentially offering in. I know that we are doing a full series of webinars, and just as a spoiler alert, one of them might be covering where and how to search out some of that legal help. But please just make sure that you aren't just grabbing something. Get something that's best fit for you, because we are talking about the legal liabilities of your company. Once you start getting those contracts, you're going to have multiple kinds of contracts. The first one is going to be a master services agreement, and that's going to be high level. That is your basic T's and C's, or maybe a little bit more than basic, for everyone that's going to engage with you. From there, you'll start to also have individual service contracts for different partners, whether that's a cybersecurity one, whether that's cybersecurity and compliance. Depending on the services you offer, you'll have your standard MSA. That is the you agree to this in order to talk to us agreement. But from there, you start to have those service agreements and build out a full business practice around your entire offering. I spoke a little bit before about service descriptions. We want to include longer versions of those as appendices. So when we're talking about this contract, we're going to say this covers X cybersecurity service. You're going to give it a name. But then we go into the appendices for that contract, and we are going to, based on what we did with our scoping as well, this is what is included. And where relevant, specifically, this is what is not included. Especially if you do have two different versions of those contracts or two different offerings, and they're choosing option A, and there's a bunch of stuff in option A that is in option, sorry, there's a bunch of stuff in option B that isn't in option A. If they're in option A, they need to know that they are not getting that. Just because you advertise it that you can do it, they have not opted in for that. So you need to make sure that that's really, really clear to them. And from there, you've now got your wonderful contracts, you've got your scoping, you know what the product is. You need to go talk to your existing clients and you need to recontract them, especially if you are going to go through a process off the back of this where you're going to change your master services agreements. Your business may already have those in place, and you may go through a process that they are, you may change them, you may update them. Make sure you recontract everyone depending on the length of contracts you've got. I'm not going to give specific advice because it is going to, in some ways, depend on what you've already got in your business. Make sure you recontract them. You need to know what it's going to look like going forward, not just where it's come from. And so does your customer. They need to know what they can rely on you for. Especially if you are building your security practice, especially if you're upgrading that and coming from a place where you had a base offering and now you're offering more. That's also a really valuable place to tell them that they are getting more for that. And yes, the price is going up, but we have to include more things by default with that contract there. If we go to the next slide, we can start to talk a little bit about the implementation projects. And I'm actually, just off the back of what we're saying, I'm going to hit the last point on here when we start talking about communication templates. When you recontract your clients and everything else that we're going to be talking about in the product or in this particular presentation about productizing your cybersecurity offering, you are going to have to contact people multiple times. And you're going to have to contact a lot of different potential clients and existing clients. The more that you can create a template for that, and the more that you can make that replicatable, that's going to be so much easier on your business, on your staff, and on your customers, because it's going to be clear, it's going to be standard, and it is going to be the same. Everyone involved in that process will know what to expect. So I just want to reiterate, make sure you're creating templates for all of this so you don't have to repeat the work. But going back to the start of this, we want to talk about, like, now we've decided what products we're going to do. We've recontracted our clients and we're going to start implementing it. So what do we do from there? We scoped out the products we wanted. We scoped out what we were doing versus the specific frameworks. We now need to create a scope of work from that. So that's going to be the requirements to get from A to B. A is unknown at this stage. So we need to know roughly what's going to get us to B, and by going through the scope of works, we're going to know exactly what we need to do to get us to our required stage. So the first thing you're going to look at is what tools have you decided to go with? How are you going to install them? Is there going to be any direct client impact? Is there going to be any indirect client impact? Or potentially, is there no client impact? You might be thinking specifically initially about downtime impact, and that's a huge part of it. Any change of I have to log into a different system that I'm used to, all those sorts of impacts. But one of the things that I sometimes always pops up in the back of my head is, are you moving from a system that had a lot of pop-ups or not many pop-ups to one that has not many pop-ups or a lot of pop-ups? That's something that's going to put this more potentially in the customer's brain. So we need to tell them, yeah, you're going to get more pop-ups because we want to alert you to this, or you're going to get less pop-ups because we're just going to handle it. Make sure that that's part of your scope of works, especially when you're thinking about the difference between indirect and no client impact. There's probably going to be some client impact whether or not you think about it. So really get detailed. If I was an end user, what's going to change for me? If I'm an IT manager in that company, or if I am whoever I am in that business, what is going to change for me? From there, you're also going to start looking at that remediation work. We've now established what B is, and we're going to start looking at our general clients and then even specific clients. Is now I know what A is. What is it going to take for me to get from A to B? And that's where we start to price it out as well. There's definitely a tendency for MSPs who've been managing a client for an existing time period that are coming through and pricing this remediation work to feel a little bit guilty potentially that they didn't do this before. I'm going to say don't. This is a new offering. This is you adapting to the new threat landscape. This is a requirement. Everyone will start to understand, and we've had so much public news about the recent breaches from Optus and all of that, is cybersecurity is no longer an enterprise-only problem. It is something that everyone has to be aware of. And in some ways, from an advertising perspective, that's helped us sitting in this security space. People are aware of that now. But now we actually have to make sure that they understand, yeah, this used to be enough, and this used to be enough, and this is why I sold it. This is what it worked. Now we need to get you to this next stage because everything else has evolved. And you're going to have to price that out. And you're going to have to work with your clients to get to that point. Don't feel guilty that what used to work isn't what works anymore, because that's not your fault. That is threat actors evolving, and your partners are going to have to pay for that because they want to remain protected in a much more threat active environment. Once we've priced that out, once we've got a scope, we want to start talking about project plans. How are we actually going to do this? You want tickets. You want to start looking at estimated timings. How long is this going to take? What are my extra dependencies? We're doing a big project for this client right now. How do we roll it into that? Can we push that project timeline out to roll this cybersecurity upgrade into all of that? One of the key takeaways that you can potentially look at doing, and especially if you're talking to us about any products or anything like that, how are you going to do this internally first? Your first client, when it comes to a big operational implementation of cybersecurity frameworks and stuff, is you. How is this going to work for your staff? Yes, make sure that you go through, okay, we estimated that this was going to take us X amount of time. It took us Y amount of time, and make sure you have the dependencies or anything else that's affected that, because you're going to want to then implement this in your clients, and you need to make sure that that entire environment is covered off. The other thing from that is you're going to start to find out things that were business critical that maybe you didn't necessarily think about before. Maybe there's something in your environment that you no longer have access to because you haven't whitelisted it, but that's something that's potentially going to be in your customers' ecosystems as well. The more you know going into it, the easier it is going to be to create a project plan, and the better the plan. And once you know all of that, the easier it's going to be to stick to it. And then again, as we spoke about before, the more you template this, not just the communication templates, but the project plan templates, the more you can do that, the easier it will be to roll out multiple times, because you are going to have to roll this out multiple times. And the easier it is to learn and develop those for the next time you have to do this as well. We can move to the next slide. So indirectly, I've spoken a lot about process and procedure as part of that, but let's talk about that very specifically now. Roles and responsibilities. Anytime you are doing a big project plan like this, you are going to want to make sure that everybody knows whose job it is to do what, but not just beyond whose job it is, whose responsibility. So in your business, that might be saying, okay, this team is going to be responsible for this one, and our technical team will do this and make sure that any additional remediation work is communicated to sales or accounting. And if required, there's an additional negotiation around that. We also want to make sure that your technical teams, both with you and with your customer, are aware of whose job it is to do what. If your techs are going to go out there for a day to install some stuff, work with the customer, to train them, you need to make sure that the customer's done what they need to do first. And the best way to do that is to make sure that they're very aware of it, and also to understand any repercussions that would happen if they don't do that. We'll talk about things like implementation. You want to talk about things like ongoing compliance, any assessments. The big one that we'll continue to talk about throughout any cybersecurity conversation is not just the compliance and assessments, but what happens when there's an incident. Who is responsible when something goes wrong, and how are we going to make sure that that gets adhered to? And with that, you've got monitoring as well. It says on the slide here, and I just want to reiterate that, make it really clear. Keep it really clear and simple, because this is not where you want people going, oh, I thought that was your job. This is a big business project. Make sure it's super clear. And beyond that, we also want to make sure that we document everything. We'll start on this slide here talking about documenting clear standards. We're talking about getting customers from A to B, but we need to document what B is, so that we always know how do we get them to B, because we know what B is. You need to make sure that policies are in place. You need to make sure that anything that you document in terms of setups is there. And from that, we always want to talk about measuring it against what framework, and how are you going to measure it, and how are you going to check that it's still there. And there are a number of tools, and again, we're not going to talk about specific products today, but there are a number of tools across your entire business that you can be utilizing to do this. And it's also something that you can adopt, not just cybersecurity, but around anything else that you're doing in your business. If you start to put these standards in place and these processes in place, it's much easier to roll this out across an entire operation, rather than just having this for this and this for this. Start coming up with standards for your standards as well. And then from there, coming off standards, the exact procedures. This is B. Here are the standards or standard operating procedures about how we usually get there. Again, compliance checks, reportings. The big ones, what do I do when I add a user? But now I've got all these additional checks I need to do to make sure that that cybersecurity framework is adhered to when I add a user. I need to make sure that all the extra stuff that I'm adding on as part of it is added to a user. What do I need from my customer in addition now that I'm adding a user? And just apply that logic thought to every aspect of the business, and start documenting out those operational procedures. And as I mentioned before, incidents. Document and communicate every single step of the incident response plan. You might have someone that is mainly responsible for it. You need to know what's going to happen if they're on leave. You need to make sure that there is a response plan in place if the person that's supposed to cover that person while they're on leave is also on leave. You need to make sure, beyond every other documentation, that your incident response plan is there and everyone is aware of it. It is your playbook for what to do when things go wrong. We like to think that nothing's going to go wrong. We're going to protect ourselves as best as we can. We're going to do all of this. But at the end of the day, we need to know what to do when something goes wrong. We can probably look at the next slide now. And this is the last bit that sort of tacks off that in terms of what you do with your incident response plans and documentation. It's the ongoing compliance. It's making sure that you never have to use that incident response plan. And the first thing that you're going to do is create a list. One of the things that I've spoken about through most of this presentation has been get detailed. Make sure that you're covering as much as you can by it and add to the list. Make sure you know what needs quality assurance. What do you need to monitor? What do you need to have set out to do that? Figure out what can be automatically maintained or monitored, what you need to check manually, who needs to do that. Does it need to be done quarterly? Does it need to be done twice a year? Is it okay to do it once a year? You need to figure that out from there. Start to score those items. That is going to be a combination of how important they are, what areas they fall into, and what the minimums are again. We'll start talking, we've talked a bit about what the minimum required is. Make sure everyone's at least at the minimum, and how do we score what that minimum is? It's always about knowing how to check it. From there, you're going to love this one. Create a report. Make it really easy for you to see that. Make it really easy for your staff to see that. We want to be super extensive with what we're doing and super detailed in the information we're collecting. But we also want to make it really easy to present to us, really easy to read, and you don't want to miss something. When we talk about operationalizing this, we talk about getting really into the weeds about the things that we need to do. And some of these frameworks are so extensive about things that you need to tick off. Make it easy for yourself beyond that to check that framework, to check that standard operating procedure. You don't want to miss something because it's too detailed. You want to make sure those alerts are telling you exactly what you need to know. We don't want to get alert fatigue around that. We want to make sure that we know what's going on. And one of the key ways to do that is, depending on what PSA you're using or what your business operations look like, recurring tickets. There will be a way in your business to implement something that is a recurring reminder to say, go check this partner. Start to look at when you should have those recurrences. If it is something that only needs to be tracked yearly, make sure it's a yearly recurring ticket, and have a look at when you're triggering these for different customers. If you've got an accountancy firm, you probably want to do this for, you probably want to make sure that you are reviewing this prior to their busy period at the end of the financial year, because that's probably when they and their customers are most likely to be attacked, because there's so much going on in that period. So let's make sure that you're doing that around then, and build that again. As we talked about, we're talking about project plans, we're talking about contracting. Make sure that everything you're doing here feeds back into what you're communicating to your customer base. So it's not just about what you do at the start, and this whole project around operationalization of cybersecurity, I can't say that word, is really going to make sure that you are taking it from start to finish and guiding your business practices, not just around this aspect, but as you start to adapt these processes to your wider business as well. And the last key piece is making sure that your staff are up to date on all of this, and making it easy for them. So I will hand back to Maria to talk to that part.
Thank you, Diana. So Diana's talked about documenting processes. That is useful from your business perspective, how you're running the business. It's also important to share that documentation with all of your staff, and it doesn't matter who in your organization it is, everybody. You should, can anybody else hear my microphone? Harry said he can't hear me. Is it me?
You did drop out a bit, but you've come back
Okay.
now. It's a bit louder now.
Okay, getting better now. Hit and miss. Let's see how we go. Okay, so your staff, we want your staff to all be trained. You should have a security first approach. Every single staff member, it doesn't matter who it is, because we all know that humans are the weakest point in a security breach. It's been shown time and time again, and it's either humans or it's the operational aspects around those humans. So we're talking about that today, the operational aspects, and in giving the staff within your company and within your clients the operational framework around security that will give them a focus, and it'll give them structure and support and a foundation to build on. We are human. That is who we are. We all make mistakes, and mistakes are okay. But mistakes can be really costly. And there's a reason we put that operations in place to try and limit that as much as we can. So company-wide basic security training, there's a whole lot of different options in there. But don't assume that your staff know. This benchmarking that Diana's talked about, this finding that baseline of what you want to deliver, it's worth baseline testing your staff. What do you know? Technical people even the technical staff within your organization doesn't necessarily know that they know a lot about the security and how to protect themselves, how to protect your company, and how to protect your clients. So it's worth baseline measuring all of your staff and then working out how you're going to get your staff from A to B. Again, following similar steps to how you're building your product and how you're assessing your clients and how you're rolling out your systems. It's the same sort of process. We're just going to do it with the staff. Have a security champion. We find that businesses that have somebody who's super passionate about security wants to learn. This is a hugely fast-paced moving industry from a security aspect. I mean, we all know these threat actors, they're streets ahead of us. They have so many more dollars than us. It's one of the highest grossing industries in the world at the moment. They are making huge dollars and they're investing those huge dollars to get better at doing this. So we're never going to be ahead, unfortunately, I don't think. But if you've got people in your organization who are super passionate about knowing this information, they can be aware. They can be self-educating themselves. They can be trying to get as much on the front foot as possible. So we're not constantly on defensive. We can start to offensive against these threat actors. Product training, again, we're not going to talk specific products. It really doesn't matter what you've picked from your product stack, but everyone needs to know what that is. They need to be trained on it. They need to be aware of what integrates with other components and what affects other components. So if you pick multiple different products, where do they sit? Why do they sit? Why did we select them? That information is going to be really important to your staff. I'm a big believer of if you keep your staff in the dark about some of these decisions, they're not going to understand the reasons why. And we all want to know why things are done. So if you say, well, we picked these products for these reasons, and this is what they do, and this is what it does for our business. This is how it lessens the security risk in our business. Our security, you can talk about your business insurance. You've probably all got cyber insurance in your business. And you know, Diana snuck a little bit information about our contracts webinar coming up. We've actually got a cyber insurance one coming up too. Cyber insurance is another huge one. It doesn't hurt to let your staff know what's involved in cyber insurance. There's a checklist that you have to say, I commit that we are doing all of these things in our business to protect our business and our clients. Tell your staff. By the way, I had to sign a document that says we're doing all of these things. This is why we're doing all of these things. It doesn't hurt for them to know this information. And then the process training. So you've built some fantastic processes to roll out the product for your clients. Train every staff member. It doesn't hurt. Doesn't matter who it is. Every staff member should be trained on what that internal process is. I've worked at an MSP when there's been a major incident and it was all hands on deck. It didn't matter what your role was. I was in the sales team at the time, and I was on the phones. I was phoning clients. I was out there, and we'd all been trained on what our incident response was. So we all knew what to say. We knew what to say and what not to say to the clients, and how to support our clients and how to support the business that we were working in. And that business came through fine and our clients came through fine. But what you don't want is to be trying to train your staff on an incident response in the middle of an incident. You want them to know what the next steps are. So training your staff is super important. I'm going to ask you to re-rate where you think you are from the operational aspects. We've talked about a whole lot of things. There's a lot more, obviously. We've really only touched on it in our just over half an hour. There's not, we were looking at this webinar and saying we can split this into at least half a dozen courses, which with deep dive information. Today is really just an awareness training to let you know some ideas of where to get started, but I'd like you to re-rate. We'll have a look at the polls in a minute. Has your opinion of how well you're applying your operational aspects changed because of what we've offered today? So what's next? We've got a list. I will send the slides out to everyone. Identify the gaps in your business. So we've given you a few ideas of where to get started. Have a look at what you're doing, what you're not doing, and create a plan. Prioritize the actions of what is most important, where to get started, and then start working on the plan. It's worth putting security as a key item on meeting agendas, internal meeting agendas. Where are we at with the plan? Working out, speak to your staff, find out who's interested in being a champion. It may be the business owner, it may be yourself as a business owner, it may be somebody else, maybe somebody you don't expect who turns out that their secret hobby is learning all they can about security breaches. There are a lot of people who are very interested, and you'll be surprised. Diana, did you have anything to add?
Yeah, I guess one of the things to add is we've, spoken a little bit about rating where you guys felt you were about this at the start of the webinar, and then hopefully we've improved it a little bit more, or hopefully we've opened your eyes and you're like, oh gosh, maybe I need to rate myself worse and find a way to get better. If you are speaking to any of your Pax8 team anytime soon, whether that's the security solutions engineers, whether that is your account managers, whether that is part of the academy team, please tell us if the webinar helped you, or also where you were at the start, where you were at the end, and where you want to get to around that. It really helps us both tailor this content on the fly there, but also helps us help you to get to where you want to be in your business, because that is all about what we're at Pax8, and especially the academy team.
I mentioned SIS controls. I'm a little bit passionate about the SIS controls, particularly as a framework. We actually are running our SIS controls course in April. Speak to your account manager if you're keen. But to get started, if there's security resources that you would like that are around the operational side, jump into our learning management system. We have a security learning hub, and I will send the link out directly to all of you. It's loads of templates and checklists and short form video training that covers off security specific aspects. And it's free to all Pax8 partners. And if you're not a partner, you can sign up and you can get all the free content. So loads and loads of free content there. I'm going to see if anyone has any questions, and let me just make sure that everyone can have their microphone on. So if you've got any questions, feel free to raise your hand, speak up, yell out. Everyone should be able to come off mute and ask questions now. No questions? Okay, well. Diana, did you have anything you wanted to add?
Nothing specific, but obviously if anyone has any questions, we'll hang around to answer. But feel free to reach out to us as the team and to Pax8 if you do have any questions that you think of after this call, because I do that myself.
What I was just going to do very quickly, let me have a look at the poll results. See if the polls are there. The results. Okay. We had an average of 2.6 as our poll results for the first one. So that's interesting. Majority of people felt that they were at a 3. out of 5. Okay. Well, we will wrap it up. I'm loading the recording of this. You will get copies of the slides. And as Diana said, please feel free to reach out to either of us and any of our Pax8 team, and we are more than happy to assist you with more content. Thank you for coming today. Thank you, Diana.
Thanks, everyone.